If magic lake water made you invincible, or you were stuck in a skyscraper during a major earthquake, or a cyber demon wanted to rip your frickin' legs off, what would you do? That's right, you know the drill. We've got another anthology of terror to work through, each one even crazier than the last. And I really do mean that. It's like all these people got together and asked ChatGPT, what's the weirdest, most off-the-wall shit we could possibly come up with? Then they looped the response through Google Translate until it lost all meaning. I warn you, much of what you're about to see doesn't make any sense at all, but we're doing it. So get ready, or you might just not survive the ride. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the analog horror stories in VHS 85. Rob and friends have their whole lives ahead of them. Being 20-somethings without a care in the world, they decide to spend the perfect weekend weather, water skiing and slugging back beer brand beer out at a beautiful Lake Lake Evic. Sorry. Clearly, a place as nice as this couldn't possibly be some kind of death trap, right? I mean, sure, they had to remove a no trespassing sign to get out here, and it says no swimming right by the lake itself. But that's all probably just communist propaganda meant to prevent America's youth from breathing in the sweet air of freedom. This is the 1980s after all. In fact, not too long after this outing, a ragtag group of high school students would help fight off a combined Cuban-Soviet invasion as depicted in the legendary documentary known as Red Dawn. So, we should probably keep our eyes peeled for infiltrators scoping out the landing zones. That being said, there's more than enough domestic threats out there capable of turning the group's little booze cruise into a bloodbath. After all, they are technically trespassing right now, and you never know whether the landowner might subscribe to the old shoot, shovel, and shut the fuck up policy when it comes to home defense. Well, I guess they know now. Obviously, the best move in this situation would be to lay on the throttle and run this tub of ground on the shore opposite the gunfire. Or at least it would have been had the shooter not blown out the motor before we even got the chance. In that case, our only option would be to swim for it, which isn't actually as hopeless as one might think. Judging by the severity of the wounds and the accuracy of the fire, it's safe to say the killer is using some kind of high-powered rifle cartridge, which, even at this distance, would still retain considerable amount of velocity, as demonstrated on Mythbusters back in the day. The faster a bullet is traveling when it hits the water, the less it's able to penetrate. Think of it like the difference between gently dipping your hand into the water and slapping the surface as hard as you can. Nerds, it's no secret by now that I have something of a gaming addiction, and as a member of the PC Master Race, I know that true power comes not from the effectiveness of your playstyle, but the sweatiness of your equipment. And the foundation of any good gaming rig is a rock-solid, customizable computer desk from FlexiSpot. Choose from a variety of layouts, sizes, frame colors, and desktop materials to ensure your desk fits not only your entire setup, but also the layout and decor of that dungeon you call a game room. I have the E8 in beautiful bamboo because I needed something strong enough to withstand the full force of my nerd rage while playing Escape from Tarkov. Of course, once you've left your enemies broken on the battlefield, it'll be pretty difficult to dance on their graves while you're stuck sitting down. Or at least it would be were it not for the FlexiSpot's seamless transition from a seated to standing desk using high quality electric motors. These bad boys have a load capacity of up to 352 pounds or 160 kilograms, meaning no conceivable amount of empty Red Bull cans will prevent you from achieving a more flexible range of motion. Plus, with additional accessories such as USB charging ports or drawers you can store your vital equipment in, you can keep your desk gun in arm's reach in case the bad guys want to 1v1 you in real life. So what are you waiting for? Head on down to the link in the description and get off your ass with FlexiSpot today. FlexiSpot has Amazon Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales that are up to 70% off. Plus, get free shipping on all orders between November 24th and November 27th. Thanks to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. In that case, we should ditch our life vests and roll overboard. Once once again aiming for the opposite shore. Luckily, we can hear the rifle's muzzle reports well enough to pinpoint their general location. Of course, the movie gets this wrong by playing the gunshot sound before the bullet impacts, meaning either the speed of sound travels 3 times faster in this universe, or the bad guy's running subsonics, which I highly doubt for the reasons mentioned above. Once we're in the water, we'll want to immediately dive several feet under to avoid incoming fire and conceal our movements. Of course, if the shooter has any brains at all, they'll assume we're going to the other side of the lake, but there's no way they'll be able to hit us along the way. And even if we have to repeatedly come up for air, not even Chuck Mahaney could line up a shot in the short amount of time it'd take to surface, grab a breath, and resubmerge, especially if we split up a little. As for our end game, that's where things get kinda dicey. Transitioning from the water to dry land will take time that we don't have, so I try looking for a fallen log or big rock sticking up by the shore that we could use for cover. At that point, it's just a matter of hauling out into the woods and finding the nearest paved road to potentially flag down a passing motorist. The good news is that we all saw the mysterious blue pickup back at our campsite before the shooting started, so at least we'll know who to avoid while looking for help. And before you even say it, simply ducking down in the boat and waiting until dark is entirely out of the question. Fact is, there's nothing on this boat that we could hide behind that could reasonably stop a bullet, something which both Rob and Drew are about to find out the hard way.
Oh my god, he's shooting to the boat! He's shooting to the boat!
Hey, maybe instead of screaming about it, you should have gotten out of the boat. Oh well, I guess that's it then. Not much more we can learn from this episode besides respecting other people's property rights like your life depends on it, because it just may. Except, hang on, it looks like some of our party members were only mostly dead. Even Kelly with that whole Covenant Elite thing she's got going on there. What's even stranger is that despite their grievous and seemingly life-obliterating injuries, they feel totally fine. You know, provided they don't go looking in the mirror anytime soon. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to everyone. 3 of the group members are still horizontal, which doesn't make a ton of sense given their wounds aren't any worse than those of the survivors. I mean, just look at Rob for Christ's sake. Dude's brains are hanging out. Saying all of this, the gang is suddenly struck by the realization that the dead never went into the lake at any point, suggesting the water may contain some sort of supernatural healing properties as yet undiscovered by modern science. I mean, otherwise, you'd think there'd be a hell of a lot more than a rusty old chain guarding this place. Either way, our first move should be to toss our friends' still lifeless bodies into the water on the off chance it might still bring them back. For real though, how is that not the first thing you guys try after making that connection? Well, whatever. At least we came back to life. Now what do?
We do exactly what he did to us.
Okay, that's one idea. I mean, I definitely agree in principle. It's just that we don't actually know for sure whether this resurrection is permanent. Last thing we need is to spend a ton of time tracking someone down only to drop dead when it suddenly wears off. Hate to say it, but we should probably turn our footage into the cops and leave it to the professionals while we pull ourselves together. Besides, if things go sideways and we get caught avenging our own homicides, it would really suck to serve a life sentence knowing you could never die. As horrible as this all was, some people might still say the best revenge is living well. And for once, I actually agree, seeing as how we just stumbled upon a real-life infinite money glitch. No, seriously, forget everything that just happened here today. We may very well have discovered a cure for every conceivable ailment, and possibly even death itself. Do you have any idea how valuable this is? First thing we should do is empty the water tank in the Winnebago and refill it from the lake. There's no telling how much is needed for an effective dose, so we'll want to make off with as much as physically possible on every trip. And of course, it goes without saying that we will tell absolutely no one else about this. In fact, you know what? It's actually a good thing those other 3 are dead. Fewer people to spill the beans, and we all know Kelly's not talking. From there, we need to make sure the curative properties still exist outside the body of water itself. That should be pretty simple through a little animal testing. After all, Rob saw an extremely dead woodchuck come back to life on the lake shore earlier, so we know it's not just limited to humans. Just buy some bunnies, sprinkle a little Evic water on them, and then shoot them with a shotgun. If they live, we're in business. If not, we'll have to get creative. innovative. The next question is whether or not we go the big pharma route or set ourselves up as a new religion. Both have their benefits for sure. However, in the case of the former, we'll have to figure out a way to dilute the waters such that the effects will eventually wear off. Can't have our customers becoming immortal off the first hit, or else they won't have a reason to buy from us anymore. If that's not possible, then going the megachurch route will probably work better long term. This way, we can be super selective about who we share our miracle with, while still being able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt our faith healing is legit. Furthermore, by making it seem as though the power is coming from some mystical force, we can obscure the true source to eliminate any potential competition, thereby ensuring we go on to dominate the market. At that point, all we have to do is set our followers up on some kind of subscription fee in exchange for the promise of eternal life, and we'll all be rich as hell in no time. Whichever way we go with this, our first stretch goal will be to buy Lake Evik and the surrounding area to cut down on transportation costs and to better protect our cash cow. After that, we'll eventually want to work towards infiltrating all three branches of the government through shadow donations to both major political parties, thereby granting ourselves access to the highest echelons of power in the Western world. Then, and only then, do we use our immense wealth and influence to track down the people who shot at us and have them flung into deep space after being cursed with immortality. But that's just how I would go about it. How would you nerds exploit this discovery for personal gain? Let me know down in the comments. Ultimately, Rob and friends must have just gone straight to a private eye with the license plate they recorded, as we soon find ourselves back in suburbia, where teenage Ruth Wrigley is celebrating with her family. As part of the festivities, she's prepared a video to be played on one of them newfangled VHS contraptions, some highlights from which I will play for you now.
So I saw these people at a gas station and I followed them to this lake in the middle of nowhere.
No, please don't.
Well, that clears up a lot. Turns out trespassing had nothing to do with it. As the birthday girl points out, some families celebrate confirmations and baptisms, while other families ruthlessly slaughter groups of innocent strangers as part of a long-standing tradition. Something to do with the number 7. I don't know. Basically, they're all serial killers, with virtually everyone in this room having taken out 7 randos through various means at some point in their lives. In that case, she must be a favorite niece around here, because all those oohs and ahs of the execution of her ham-fisted plan can't possibly be genuine. So, you spot 7 people on their way to go camping and decide to follow them on the off chance they don't just go to some cookie-cutter campground packed full of people. Okay, fine. I can understand why someone in her position might take that chance, but then once you're at the location, you just drive right up to them in broad daylight, get out, and start shooting. As if it's totally impossible someone else might spot your vehicle or even catch it on camera. And then there's the fact that 5 of her potential targets were out on a boat in the middle of the lake when she opened up. All it would have taken to completely blow the whole thing was one of them looking over while she was smoking their friends, at which point they would have been gone. Seriously, it's nothing short of a miracle they stayed still long enough for her to pick them all off like that. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that they're still all on a boat in the middle of the lake. Does she have a boat? No, which means she can't even go out there to make sure they're actually dead. What we have here is a complete failure to understand the target. They're going out in an RV, meaning they're probably going to be spending the night. And they're a bunch of rowdy college kids, meaning there's 100% going to be alcohol involved. Once Ruth got out there and made a note of their location, she should have stashed her vehicle somewhere discreet and then observed them from a distance until nightfall. Once they were all good and passed out from hours a day drinking, she could have easily walked up, dosed anyone still hanging around outside, and then worked her way through the RV while the others were cornered. At that point, magic lake water or not, there is no way any of them would be able to track her down. Instead, her lack of proper planning all but guarantees the Wrigleys are in for some ready or not action. It's just a matter of time. And sure enough, before she could even finish her tape, the police call in on the bullhorn, letting them know that they're surrounded. Strangely enough, however, most of the family's entirely unfazed by this development. On the contrary, it seems they've been preparing for this exact scenario for quite some time.
What's running me?
Nice of them to make it easy. Don't get me wrong, a house like this is entirely indefensible in a police raid. Every second they're out there, they get stronger. Every second you're in here, you get weaker. That is to say, the cops would have inevitably gotten inside and killed them all no matter what. But running out the front door guns blazing was never gonna accomplish anything. No point in rushing to your death. And apparently, no one in the house understands that better than Ruth, who waits patiently inside one of the bedrooms to join her psychotic brood in the depths of hell. Only, it really doesn't go any better for her. Put it down! A fitting end, only not so much. What Ruth couldn't possibly have known is that 4 of the 7 people she killed didn't stay that way. And after tracking her back to her house, they proceeded to arm one of her little cousins with a squirt gun full of the very same lake water that brought them back to life. Guess they figured it'd find its way to the perpetrator somehow. Although, that seems like a pretty big gamble if you ask me. What was stopping the kid from ditching the thing immediately, or surrendering it to a concerned parent? And what if it was too successful? They could have unwittingly created an unkillable cult of heavily armed lunatics. We should have watched the blue truck from a distance until we were certain of who it belonged to, and then hit her directly with a water balloon or squirt gun attack to ensure she, and she alone, would be condemned to eternal suffering. As long as one of the boat survivors did it, she probably wouldn't recognize them, and it could easily be brushed off as a prank by random jerks. As for Ruth, she tries her hardest to achieve something I'm not even allowed to talk about on YouTube, but to no avail, and at last, her brief reign of terror ends with her being dragged kicking and screaming off to spend the rest of her unnatural life rotting in a cell somewhere. In the end, Rob and company got their revenge, but it doesn't change the fact that 3 of their friends are still gone for good, and the rest of them are cursed to roam Earth for all eternity. That said, once everyone woke up dead, they had an opportunity to make some serious cash while also achieving ultimate revenge further down the road. For those reasons, I think this one was the moral of the story. The best revenge is living well, while also still getting revenge. Alright, so these next 2 are kind of on the shorter side, so bear with me on the change of pace. Lewis is the man behind the scenes. He spent years at the Orita TV studio making others look good. Little does he realize this time around, he'll be the star of the show. Today's broadcast starts off like many other, with the anchors teeing off some soft news puff piece on, I don't know, architecture or something. However, things proceed to liven up considerably when the entire building housing the studio begins shaking violently. And that's not all. Ouch. Yeah, she probably should have put that giant news desk to good use and crawled underneath it. Seriously, it's Earthquake Safety 101, and as violently as the building was shaking, it would have been reasonable to assume things would start falling apart, especially for someone living in an area with a history of catastrophic earthquakes. Turns out this episode takes place in Mexico City, and contrary to anchor Lucia's famous last words, everything is not going to be alright. The earthquake we're witnessing right now is meant to be the infamous Mexico City earthquake of September 19, 1985. And in case you're unfamiliar, let me just say it was bad. Like really, really bad. Like 8-point magnitude, 5 billion in damage, tens of thousands of dead. Bad. And right now, our heroes are right in the middle of it. In many cases, the best place to be in a skyscraper during an earthquake is near the center by the elevator shafts and or stairwell. That said, it's generally inadvisable to make a run for these areas, as it only increases the likelihood that you might get crushed by falling debris along the way. And in reality, these safe zones vary from building to building based on a wide range of factors. So unless you're a structural engineer, which you're probably not, you're also probably not going to know where they are anyway. Fact is, if you're in a tall building like this one during an earthquake, all you can really do is shelter in place under a sturdy object, like a heavy desk or table, or even in a bathtub, and hope the whole thing doesn't collapse. If it does, your only chance of survival is to simply get lucky and wind up inside a stable pocket of debris with minimal injuries. At that point, it's just a matter of tapping SOS on the surrounding wreckage and praying the rescuers find you before somebody else. Not the most glamorous strat, I know, but that's just how it is. Eventually, the shaking stops, and Lewis comes to under a small pile of rubble just as the cavalry rolls in. After freeing our guy from the rubble, the rescue team begins leading him to safety, which he decides to document with with his massive news camera. Because how else would we see what's going on? Seriously, dude, put that thing away. For all we know, this place could come down at any second, and you're really gonna hold everyone up with that garbage. The first responder should have drop-kicked that thing out the window the second he picked it up. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, as a sudden aftershock traps the team somewhere deep inside the failing structure, leaving their fearless leader pincushioned in the process. What's worse is that he's somehow still conscious, despite pretty much having his entire chest cavity blown out by that rebar. Only one thing we can do for him now.
Do it, Rico!
You know, I still always wonder why he wouldn't aim for the head in that situation. Fortunately for the boss man, Carla totally gets it. See, that was much more humane. As for the others, one of the crew members finds an air duct leading to question mark? Like, I get this place isn't exactly stable right now, but maybe it's not such a great idea for all of us to climb inside at once without knowing where it goes. I mean, who's to say it doesn't dead end in a 50-foot vertical drop? Not only that, but ductwork like this is often riddled with weaker sections we could easily fall through, especially with our combined weight, which is exactly what happens. Awesome. Maybe instead of putting all our proverbial eggs in one basket, we should have sent Carla in by herself to scout ahead. Not only is she the lightest, she's also the smallest, which would allow her to squeeze into any narrow sections she might encounter along the way. At any rate, the sudden drop leaves our heroes trapped in what is clearly an underground cave system exposed by the earthquake, and with no way back into the building, the gang proceeds into the death trap. Because why not, right? Yeah, no thank you. Crawling around a ventilation shaft is bad enough, but there's no way in hell I'm adding spelunking to today's activities. We get trapped in there, and there's pretty much zero chance anyone comes looking for us. At least at our current position, we could still shout up out in the ventilation ducts in the hopes that someone else hears the echo. Besides, what are the odds this tunnel leads back to the surface? There's a literal city built on top of it, meaning any other exits were probably filled in with concrete decades ago. And of course, once we start finding fully intact pre-Hispanic murals and artifacts all over the place, I'd be turning right around immediately. Not necessarily because of superstitions, mind you, but because they serve as a pretty solid indication no one's been down here for hundreds of years, which is even further proof it's a dead end. Then again, maybe the supernatural implications are worth entertaining. After all, as one of the rescuers suddenly starts popping and locking his way into a fit of demonic rage, all while screeching about something called Mictlan. Obviously, this is well before smartphones put Wikipedia in everybody's pocket, so I wouldn't expect them to know that Mictlan is the underworld in Aztec mythology, which, spoiler alert, you can only reach after dying. Of course, you wouldn't actually have to know what it means to realize we need to get the hell away from this guy before he does something insane. Like that. Special thanks to Lewis and his terminal bystander apathy for doing absolutely nothing to help the people that saved his life. Or at least tried to, anyway. That said, they're probably all screwed anyway, as the crazed outburst gives way to the arrival of none other than the Aztec death god himself, Mictlantec. Mictlantec? Damn it, Martin, I'm not reading that shit. Yeah, Death Guy is here, and apparently he's really pissed off about these filthy casuals skipping the usual 4-year journey required to reach his domain. However, he's not about to debase himself by slaughtering some lowly mortals. No, like any good wrathful deity, he needs a proxy, and wouldn't you know it, Carla's already got experience. Guess that invincible cameraman thing was a bunch of bullshit. Huh. And with that, Carla rips out Lewis's still beating heart before offering it up to what's-his-name as a sacrifice. In the end, everyone either died or became the mindless servant of a living god. Sadly, this whole situation really just came down to misfortune. There really isn't anything they could have done that likely would have made a difference. For that reason, I think this one remains unbeaten. Moral of the story, luck harder next time. Now, if you thought that last one escalated pretty quickly, you'd better buckle up, because our next story gets crazy fast. Ada runs a one-woman show, and it's pretty much your typical load of high-minded theater nonsense delivered via shouting. Only this time, with a bit of a twist. Instead of simply lambasting her audience of pretentious weirdos for being mindless cogs in the gearbox of a broken system, man, Ada's brought along a host of anachronistic VR technology to help her get her point across. The idea here is simple. At some point, mankind stopped worshiping all its old gods and started worshiping technology. And while I can definitely understand that particular sentiment, this next part is where she loses me. You see, Ada here plans to use all these gadgets she brought along to summon a being she refers to as the god of technology, and this is how she intends to do it. Yeah, so be it for me to tell people what to believe in, but isn't the concept of a technological god more of a metaphorical thing? I mean, this whole Ready Player One get up she has is cool and all, but at the end of the day, she's just playing a computer game, right? Well, if that's the case, she clearly sucks at it, because the first enemy that comes along straight up wipes the floor with her. Gotta admit though, that haptic feedback suit really kicks ass. Folks would be a lot less likely to go running and gunning in FPS games, knowing the price for taking a headshot would be actual brain damage. Now that is what I call immersion. Haters will say it's fake, of course, and clearly the audience is full of them, as they hardly even react to the sight of Ada getting her hand ripped off in real life. That said, it's not exactly the most difficult stage effect to pull off. This next one, on the other hand, takes major talent. Game over. Seriously though, apparently E3 used to be nuts back in the day. Still, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Ada being brutally ripped to shreds by a techno boogan wasn't part of the show. Although, evidently, everyone watching it thinks it was. Not sure how they can reconcile the violent dismemberment they just witnessed with the rudimentary effects normally used in theater, but I guess that just means the reviews will be overwhelmingly positive. Too bad Ada won't be alive to read any of them though. In the end, I don't think our star could have possibly known she might actually bump into the honest-to-God Omnissiah out in the metaverse. If she had, you'd think that she'd have a team ready to pull her out of the Matrix when things went horribly wrong. Aside from that, just about the only thing she could have done was run out into the crowd while begging for them to help her. But considering how the VR peripherals seemingly fused to her body during the confrontation, it's unlikely there's anything anyone could have done to save her. For that reason, I think this one remains unbeaten. Moral of the story, get good. Well, that was certainly fun, but let's get back to something we can actually strategize for, shall we? Detective Wayne "The Not Rock" Johnson is at his wit's end. Just last week, his department received an eerie snuff film depicting the brutal slaying of a young woman with an electric carving knife. And lo and behold, here he stands in the exact same house as the video, where the exact same woman was murdered in the exact same way. The only explanation, even verging on logical, was that the killer staged the video with the victim's participation before coming back later to do it for real, which, while certainly possible, still seems hard to believe. As for the video itself, there's a few things we could talk about. For starters, the perp picked a lock before entering through the front door. That is absolutely a thing that can happen, and even some of the most expensive locks on the market can be defeated in seconds by someone who knows what they're doing. Just check out the channels like Lockpicking Lawyer or McNally Official if you want to see proof. It's startling to say the least. About the only way to prevent this would be to install internal deadbolts on all your exterior doors, or even brace them shut with chairs or purpose-built bracer bars. There are ways around these as well, but most rely on the intruder knowing exactly what kind of supplemental locking device you're using ahead of time. That said, given enough time and effort, all doors and windows can be breached. The key is making sure you have enough of an early warning to hole up and prepare a weapon or two. By 1985, home security systems were certainly available, although not nearly as common. But the simplest solution is just to have a dog around that can alert you by barking. Just don't bet the house on them to do any actual protecting, unless they were specifically trained for it. Oh yeah, also, if someone's targeting your home specifically and they know that you have a dog, there's a good chance they'll try to poison it ahead of time. So watch out for that. Based on the video, the victim knew that there was an intruder, despite his subtle means of entry, and she used the opportunity to call the police. So at least that ensures there'll be someone around to find her body later. Always remember that when seconds count, the cops are minutes away, maybe even hours. You need to prepare to handle things yourself. By the way, that doesn't always mean sticking around to fight. Although if what's-her-name had been armed, she could have easily drilled the butcher the second he walked in the room. Aside from that, a solid alternative would be fleeing out the window. It's not that high up, and from there you could potentially run over to a neighbor's house, or even jump in your car, assuming you keep your keys handy. Oh, and another thing, just because the dispatcher tells you to stay on the line doesn't mean you have to. Once help is on the way, there's pretty much nothing they can do for you besides telling you to hide, which in this case doesn't go super well for our Vic. Let's see if you could figure out why. Gee, yeah, it's hard to say. Well, hiding in this situation wasn't a good idea anyway. Dude made a beeline straight for the master bedroom, which means he was almost certainly looking for her. In that case, unless she had an actual panic room she could retreat to, it was only a matter of time before he found her. Realistically, her only options would have been to either resist with the firearm or flee the house entirely. And the same goes for the star of our next video. Just like before, the killer picks the lock on his front door to gain entry, and just like before, the homeowner heard it right away. Must be some light sleepers in this town. At any rate, it doesn't do him any favors, as his golf club attack is quickly thwarted by the perpetrator, ultimately resulting in him being disarmed. Fingers first. Yeah, valiant effort there, bro. But unless you had literally no other choice, charging out at the attacker with a melee weapon is not the move. We find out later that no one else was home at the time, so it's not like he had to worry about protecting a loved one in another room. Like I said before, no point in rushing to your death. He likely would have gotten better results by posting up in the dark and staging an ambush. Unfortunately, just like the young woman before him, dude won't live long enough to regret his mistake. As for Detective Johnson, he once again finds himself at a loss with this situation. It's not just the weirdness with the tapes coming in ahead of time. Both crime scenes apparently lack any kind of evidence that could be used to bring someone in. The only good news is that we know the murder were connected based on the videos, as well as the same weapon being used in both instances. Now, we just need to figure out whether the victims had some kind of connection with one another, as this could help us determine why someone would want to target them in the first place. Even more promising, however, is the major break investigators receive when officers bring in the shady individual responsible for mailing in the videotapes. The only downside is that they caught him while he was in the middle of dropping off volume 3, and you know what that means. Well, for the time being, we can at least squeeze young Night Pain here to try and figure out how he's getting these. And this is where starts getting ridiculous. For starters, it turns out this kid happens to be the son of Johnson's colleague and forensic cameraman Bobby, who for some reason participates in the interrogation. I mean, that just seems like a massive conflict of interest. After all, it's reasonable to think he might try and protect his son from prosecution. Yeah, on second thought, Bobby clearly never protected him from anything else, and having his dad present could potentially dissuade him from lawyering up. I don't know, it's weird. It's just weird. However, the strangeness of this coincidence absolutely pales in comparison to Gunther's explanation of how he acquired the tapes in the first place. Turns out, they recently got a new VCR, but instead of recording their favorite shows and whatnot, it started cranking out recordings of Gunther's various head movies, specifically those depicting the brutal slayings that would ultimately come true. Now, if this sounds completely insane to you, it's because it is, but honestly, how else can you explain these tapes? Time travel? Naturally, Wayne remains skeptical, but Bobby backs up his son's story, citing an apparent history of premonitions running in their family. True or not, we know for a fact the videos are predicting murder. And there's still the matter of the third tape Gunther sent out earlier. Upon viewing it, Wayne and Bobby find more of the same grainy gore porn as before, only this time the footage starts from far enough back to catch the street address on the front door. Realizing the homeowner's in immediate danger of being torn apart by a bloodthirsty psychopath, the detective quickly pulls together as many uniforms as possible to secure the surrounding area. I'm just kidding. He and Bobby go out there by themselves. Never mind the fact that the latter turned in his badge long ago to screw around with cameras. I'm sure it's just like riding a bike. However, before they can knock knock on the door and absolutely terrify the woman inside with foreknowledge of her impending doom, Wayne decides they need to have a little chat beforehand. You see, in digging up information on the parties involved, he discovered that both the dead woman and the soon-to-be dead woman are named as plaintiffs in an active lawsuit, with the man from the second video being their attorney. And just who was the target of this suit, you might ask? Well, it was none other than Bobby, who the detective just knowingly delivered to the home of someone he might legitimately want to murder. Obviously, the implication here is that Bobby used his access as a former police officer to track down and viciously massacre these people instead of going to court. His rebuttal: Yep, didn't need psychic powers to see that coming. Seriously though, how exactly did Wayne think Bobby would react to these allegations? And then there's the fact he was looking right at him the entire time. You mean to tell me the seasoned cop didn't notice the potential murder suspect reaching for his firearm? Get the hell out of here. No, this entire confrontation was an absolute failure of law enforcement. First of all, this is not something you do while stuck inside a car without backup, especially while being parked outside the home of his next victim. Instead, once we were certain we had enough evidence to nail this bastard, we should have brought him down to the county jail under the pretense of interviewing a suspect. This would require him to be searched and relieved of any weapons before entering the secured area, where we would then start probing him for information. The same tactic was used by detectives in the famous interrogation of then police officer Stephanie Lazarus. Definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it. Alright, getting back to the movie. Bobby eventually returns to the interrogation room to tie up the final loose end. But before he could squeeze Trig on the constant reminder of his failed parenting, a random cop intervenes at the last second, thereby kicking off one of the most comically absurd shootout sequences I've ever seen. Seriously, dude chews through them like Terminator. Although, it'd probably help if the responding officers didn't all run right down the hallway at him one at a time like it's a goddamn Wolfenstein. Oh wait, what am I saying? It's 1985. Taking cover hadn't been invented yet. It's just too bad that none of them had any M10s or Uzis they could spray wildly from the hip while standing out in the open. I'm sure that would have made all the difference. Luckily, there's at least one other person in this place who can actually hit what he's aiming at. Dude never even saw it coming. And with that, the case of the pre-crime tapes is finally closed. Too bad that only happened after the killer took out all of his intended targets, as well as half the damn police station. Of course, once Detective Johnson figured out Bobby's relationship to the victims, all he had to do was approach the confrontation with even the slightest bit of subterfuge, and he could have easily saved the third victim's life, along with his own and half a dozen of his colleagues. For that reason, I think this one was beaten. Moral of the story: if you're gonna accuse someone of murder, you probably shouldn't do it alone. So yeah, that was pretty crazy, right? Anyway, before we wrap up, I have one last quick one for you. Let's get this over with. Rory is... I honestly have no idea what the hell it is. All we know is that some kid found it out in the desert, and now a bunch of stupid science dorks keep it penned up in a university lab watching trash TV all day. Apparently, they think sharing our culture with it in this way will help it learn to communicate with us. Which I guess makes sense, just as long as we don't give it any ideas. I mean, sure, this thing might look somewhat harmless, but there's something deeply unsettling about the way it just sits there menacingly, like a Venus flytrap waiting for its unsuspecting prey to get too close. And it certainly doesn't help that the lead researcher, Dr. Spratling, is totally enamored with it. He's like that one scientist in the movie Life, Dr. Derry. You know, the one who treats the horrible alien monster like it's his son or something. For real though, dude even throws this abomination a birthday party, cake and all. Yeah, I'm sure to look back fondly on this moment once it's done enslaving all of humanity. At any rate, between the leadership's increasing emotional attachment and the general freakiness of this whole situation, the rest of the team is starting to lose its nerve, with Spratling's own protege even walking off the project. And if you ask me, not a moment too soon. One day, out of nowhere, the researchers are shocked to find Rory having undergone a drastic physical transformation, despite seemingly lacking sufficient mass to do so. Even more alarming is the fact that it's beginning to strongly resemble one of the scientists, one that it never could possibly have seen without looking through the one-way mirror. Of course, Spratling is quick to defend his precious little slime ball, claiming that it's only doing this to try and communicate. Imitation, after all, is the sincerest form of flattery, but if you ask me, this is the precursor to the freak show pulling a John Carpenter and attempting to disguise itself as one of us to aid in its escape. Or even worse, we may be looking at a predator mimicking its prey. Whatever the case, now's probably a good time to talk about security. And no, I'm not about to start shilling a VPN, I just have a few questions. For example, why is this thing sitting in a barely secured wing of a public university building and not underneath an airbase somewhere? It's a shapeshifter, for Christ's sake. Clearly, whatever we're looking at here is not of this world, which means A, it's extremely valuable, and B, it's entirely unpredictable, and C, probably really dangerous. For all of these reasons, we should be taking every possible precaution, if nothing else but to ensure a hostile foreign government, i.e. the Soviet Union, doesn't try and swoop in on what would likely be the single most important discovery in the history of mankind. At the very least, we should have a heavily armed security team on hand 24/7 in case anyone or anything tries getting in or out of this place without authorization. As for the lab itself, an unknown biological entity calls for nothing short of full-on BSL-4 containment, not only to prevent any alien superviruses from escaping out into the world, but also to make sure it can't possibly be contaminated by any of our numerous Earth cooties. At minimum, this means the installation of an airtight antechamber leading into the containment area to serve as an airlock for decontamination, as well as its own self-contained air supply. And of course, anyone going in or out should be dressed in fully encapsulating positive pressure protective suits, with zero exceptions. Furthermore, given we can't possibly know Rory's intentions or capabilities, I'd want to have a wide range of countermeasures in place in case things get a little crazy. We're talking everything from microwaves to x-rays to good old-fashioned incineration. And if all else fails, I say we fill the entire level of the building with hot molten lead. It's the only way to be sure. Naturally, the team doesn't have anything in this place even approaching this level of containment. And as for the emergency procedures, should something go wrong, well, they don't have any of those either. Case in point, when the amorphous space blob of unknown origin starts behaving strangely, they just send in one of their dudes wearing nothing but a painting suit to give it a shot of adrenaline. You know, because it's definitely just sick, and not actively baiting them with the oldest trick in the book, the damsel in distress. And sure enough,
don't panic, it's okay, he's just curious.
Yeah, man, it's just curious. Like when a great white shark bites your fucking leg off to see if you're a seal. Anyway, it looks like he and Rory are roommates now, because there's simply no way we could possibly get him out of that examination room without potentially letting it out. And surely such a highly trained and principled group of scientists wouldn't dare risk something like that, right? Well, it turns out they absolutely would. And in case you thought they couldn't possibly be any more careless, they don't even bother putting any kind of PPE on before swinging the doors open and dragging their severely contaminated colleague out into the hall. However, before they manage to pull him free from the creature's grasp, both Spratling and Dr. What's-Her-Name are struck by the sudden realization of how profoundly stupid this was, at which time they just sort of let him go. Unfortunately, the damage is already done. Because neither of these morons thinks to shut the door immediately, Rory's able to deploy his GTFO tentacles down the corridors to begin violently disemboweling the people who have been holding him captive all this time. But just when it looks like Spratling might actually get away with all this, the literal blood on his hands prevents him from using the novelty hand scanner device attached to the door. And you know what that means.
We don't have to go this way.
Finally. And with that, Rory can go back to watching its Jazzercise tapes in peace. That is, until the feds detonate a special atomic demolition munition in the university building and blame it all on a gas explosion. In the end, all but one of the original scientists were killed. However, had they observed proper protocol in dealing with a potential biohazard, or even just used basic common sense, literally none of this would have happened. For that reason, I think this one was beat. Moral of the story, don't give aliens cable.